Browns are all in on Deshaun Watson, leveraging their future, their brand, the stability of their organization, all on a disgraced wild card. Can Jacoby Brissett and an elite offensive line keep the Browns competitive through the first 11 games of the season? And the Ravens were 5-1 to start the season, in position for the number one seed in the AFC before unraveling and losing 6 straight games to close the season. Is 2022 the Ravens' revenge tour? We'll discuss all of this and more on tonight's betting market outlook for the AFC North. Let's hit the opening bell. Welcome to this next edition of our betting market outlooks. I'm Brett Matthew, along with Judah at Throw the Damn Ball on Twitter. So let's start off with the 2022 win total futures for the AFC North. So see the Ravens at the top with an expected win total of 10. Bengals follow them at 9.5, juiced to the over. Browns at 8. Steelers lagging at 7.5. Anything pop out to you here, Judah?
If I had any leans, it would be the Steelers under. I think there's really so much up in the air with the Ravens, the Bengals, and even the Browns. Yes, Mike Tomlin has had a winning record. At some point, that's going to stop, right? They don't really have much talent on the roster. The vaunted defense of the 2018-2019 Steelers is really no longer. The guys are older. Got either a rookie quarterback or Mitch Trubisky. I don't really see this as the year where the Steelers continue their winning streak, and I think the alt-under is a bet in such a tough AFC.
My initial inclination was I wanted to bet Steelers over, primarily around the assumption that the market was going to be very cool on the Steelers, assuming that because there's 3 teams in this division who are all sexy in their own ways, that you'd have the Steelers here and everyone would be writing them off. But as I kind of listened to podcasts and read other people's division previews and things like that, what is priced into these lines? Because we don't want to keep talking about all the same things that everybody knows. If everyone knows it, then it's reflected in these prices. So simply just talking about them, and if that's part of our rationale for leaning one way or another, then we better think that the market is actually mispricing that very well-known fact, either to the upside or the downside, and then we're taking the other side of that position. And in the Steelers' case, it seems like everyone thinks that everyone else thinks that they're writing off the Steelers, so they're going to take the other side of that trade, which is, hey, the Steelers' defense is still pretty good. Mitch Trubisky isn't as bad as everyone thinks that he is. This is still Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin hasn't had a losing season in 15 years.
That's almost, to me, what this number says is, okay, by all accounts, the numbers say the Steelers should be worse than even a 7.5 win team. But Mike Tomlin hasn't had a losing season in 15 years. Maybe there's something we don't know. And almost the market's like hanging that up, saying, okay, what works generally for figuring out the other 31 teams, we got to have a different formula for this one.
Basically, again, because I'm so markets oriented, I see a lot of the market positioning it in that way. So one, it's not just like I'm going to unilaterally and blindly fade it to take the other side, but it gives me pause. Because again, as I came into my research, and even after I was doing my research, I still felt like, hey, I think there's some value to the over here on the Steelers. But basically, because I'm aligned with the market and the market thinks that they're being clever by buying the Steelers, is for that reason in itself, I'm probably just going to lay off. But I'm down on the Browns. So under, I love the under. I'll take the under. I'll take the under 7. Alt plus 195. The way the market is framing the Browns as long as they can be competitive up until that week 11 or whatever, then Watson's going to come in and he's going to necessarily make them absolutely better. And I don't know that that's going to be the case. Like, he would have to go through all like working out the kinks, getting in rhythm with the wide receivers, and also just playing an NFL game at NFL speed for the first time in what, like 2 years?
Yeah. No,
I think he's just going to like roll out of bed and essentially start playing like vintage Deshaun Watson, which we don't even know if he's even that athlete anymore.
Right. I take a totally different angle on the Browns. I was really hoping the market would be a little more bearish, which is that I actually think that Jacoby Brissett is an upgrade over what they had in Baker Mayfield last year. If you want to take EPA, if you want to take CPOE, if you want to take PFF passing grade, Jacoby Brissett's career averages were all better than what Baker Mayfield was in 2021. You're more or less looking at like a 9-10 win team, which I guess maybe I should be taking my over here. But I think this division's really tough and the AFC is really tough.
The other thing is, like, what I feel like no one's really taking into consideration either is, what if this team is vibing? They're like 8-3 or like 9-2 or something like that. And I'm not saying Jacoby Brissett is like just crushing it, but the team's got a rhythm. Do you bring in Deshaun Watson at that time? And then there's the Bengals again at 9.5. Juice to the over. Ravens 10. Juice to the over. I want to fade the Ravens, but again, there's like almost all of the evidence suggests that's not a good decision, especially because I think the expectations are high for them in the kind of broader betting market. I don't know anyone who's bearish on the Ravens. Do you?
No.
So I don't know. I wanted to bet the over on the Steelers. I'm going to cancel it out. Won't disagree with it. Also, I think it's just aligning up with the market for me too much. My best kind of way to angle on this division, I think, would be the Browns under.
Add even just a little bit there. Like, there's some real left tail here, which is they start out 0-3, 0-4. There's already a ton of pressure on the organization. Like, that's an example where everything can just completely fall off.
Yeah.
Like, absolute organizational dysfunction. Real possibility.
This is definitely one of the best divisions when it comes to offensive line play. So we look at some of these market rankings here. Browns ranked second, again, according to market perception. Ravens, almost the top 10, and certainly is going to be better than it was last year, given just the devastating injuries that they absorbed. Bengals dramatically improved. That's a narrative that is very well documented and probably more than priced into the market already. And then there's the Steelers, who have always had a great offensive line, certainly during the height of the Big Ben years. And then the last couple of years, it's been really bad. It was certainly one of the worst last year, and it isn't expected to be one of the worst this year because there really was no upgrades even. Besides James Daniels, one of the things we'll get into, but that was really the only kind of improvement.
Steelers are interesting on the offensive line because last year they basically didn't let their offensive line have any impact on any play because they were getting rid of the ball so quickly. I wonder if that's a function of Ben Roethlisberger's arm. Is it a function of Matt Canada's offense? Is it a combination of the two? Kind of what do we see with Trubisky or Pickett? That's definitely a question to be monitoring over the course of the season.
Let's get into the Steelers. Very bizarre year. Ended up going 9-7-1. Came into the season with an win expectation of 9. Went 8-9 ATS, which is actually quite surprising in itself as well. Ended up winning a $100 unit better, $235 on the season. From a Pythag perspective, 7 wins. Our Pythag 2.0 had them a little bit higher than that, but still the Steelers ended up outperforming that at 7.9. Mean power rank was around 16, so roughly average. And their volatility was pretty high at around 4 spots per week, which I think goes to demonstrate is the market wanting to fade the Steelers, but then putting in some sort of performance that always looked ugly, but the final score was a win or a cover. And so the market couldn't sell off on the Steelers because they were still either cashing tickets or otherwise actually winning games. And as we know, actually even ended up making the playoffs.
This team just kept on winning and couldn't really understand why, what was going right for them. Big Ben looked totally washed, and it didn't really matter to even think about where the Steelers were in 2020, which was a team that was 11-1. It was a big PFF thing. So the Steelers are fraudulent. Totally collapsed.
I know PFF certainly was riding that narrative hard, and then just really started pounding the table and kind of dancing on the grave of the Steelers. And that's why I remember coming into 2021, people would look at that 9 and say, man, that's really high. Gotta fade that. Like, the Steelers are the worst team in this division, or one of the worst teams in this division, that they're going to challenge the Bengals for the bottom was, I think, a pretty common narrative last year. And they outperformed.
Yeah.
And now expectations are even lower than that, meaningfully lower than that, at 7.5. Looking at their schedule last year, again, we saw very volatile. There was this like push-pull of everyone saying, oh, the Steelers do not look good. The Steelers are not good, but then they keep winning or covering. Started off middle of the pack with the power ranking around 14, and then jumped and got to that 9th spot. And then again, you go from 9 to 22 in a 3-week span. The market was just ready to sell off on the Steelers. Very fragile. And we can look at the time-weighted average margin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 wins. So that's definitely one of the biggest deltas that we've seen from kind of earned wins, is what we could call this maybe, and realized wins being 9. And I think one of the things that we'll talk about maybe more in future streams, and certainly over the course of the season, is something you've been taking the lead on called drive quality. Looking at adjusted scores based on kind of the quality of drives. And that was around 5 wins as well. It just quantifies what I feel like a lot of the eye tests want to say about a team when a team is outperforming what they actually look like, how they're performing on the field. What this drive quality is expected to really do is to really drill down through that misleading final score to really show what was earned from this team.
Yeah, the sense I get is that bettors think the Steelers defense is like they were in 2018, 2019, of this just like nasty unit that took, Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges to the playoffs, forcing turnovers left and right. And I think like adjusted drive quality paints a pretty good picture. Like this team is actually like a bottom 10 defense. Their secondary was dreadful. They were like 26 in perfectly covered plays. Joe Hayden was really washed up. They were really reliant on TJ Watt. I think the market might be pricing in, okay, at least the defense is good. We got like a defense and a good head coach. And we know the offense was terrible. I think everyone knows the offense was bad.
That's right.
What's almost interesting to me is where the total scoring margin over expected comes from. I would have expected it to be all offense. It's actually a mix.
That's a good call out. That total scoring margin over expected looks at how did they actually outperform expectations, and then how do you attribute that outperformance. We can see total scoring margin over expected minus 34 points, which kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's relatively split down the middle, implying that the defense underperformed kind of consistent with the offense. And to your point around the defense being really reliant on TJ Watt, the defense allowed 5.2 yards per play, but that's with Watt on the field. With Watt off the field, then it's 6.2 yards per play. So a huge difference with him simply not being on the field. And I think that's a good point too around what is being priced in the market and what is not. I agree. Everyone knows the offense is bad. Everyone expects the offense to be bad. And if the offense is anything better than bad, that's just a cherry on top. But the defense is good. And the defense is a top 5 unit. That's what the market is pricing in. So if you think the defense is much worse than that, and you're saying possibly a bottom 10,
yeah,
then that's huge.
I think the offense, if anything, will improve. You can't really get much worse than Ben Roethlisberger was last year. And I think the market is pricing in this defense as if they're still really good. Because the picture that's left in people's head is the Steelers defense carrying Duck Hodges to the playoffs.
And even carrying Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So offseason changes. And they didn't really make that many changes. So obviously the loss of Big Ben, bringing in Mr. Trubisky, and also rolled the dice and drafted George Pickens from Georgia. If Mitch Trubisky could realize the potential for what the Bears originally had from him, drafting him as the number 2 overall pick. I'm not saying that he would ever reach that type of potential, but he always showed flashes in Chicago from time to time. He's way more mobile than Big Ben. In fact, when you're the tail end of his career in Chicago, the offense actually started to open up a little, allow him to actually run more. In fact, even had more designed runs for Trubisky, allowed him to be a better quarterback. And so I wonder if Matt Canada and his offense could maybe source some of that unrealized talent from Mitch Trubisky. And so if we look at 2022, again, win expectation at that 7.5, very depressed. To win the division, expected to come in last, of course, plus 1,000, plus 350 to make the playoffs. One thing I have here is George Pickens win Offensive Rookie of the Year, plus 1,000. Certainly, probably more likely to cash than the Steelers win the Super Bowl. So Pythag 2.0, has the Steelers under. You and Pythag 2.0, you're locked in.
That's right.
Seeing eye to eye.
I don't even have the, I don't even see the Pythag 2.0 before that leans. Totally blind here.
Strength of schedule, 4th hardest. Net rest, -4 days. Mean spread, +2.5. It's pretty low for a 7.5 win expectation. Patriots, Browns, Jets, I think are all winnable. So you could be 3-1 right there.
I'm gonna be ecstatic to sell at that point.
Well, but that's the thing is, I don't think
this
they really sell, because I think even if they go into 3-1, I think the market's gonna be like the same thing as last year. It's gonna be like just waiting for the crack to show to just sell off hard on them. And if they're 3-1, it's gonna be this is the worst 3-1 team like ever.
Yeah.
And coming off the bye, then you got Saints, Bengals, Colts. That's not a breath of fresh air coming out of the bye. Then Falcons, Ravens, Panthers. Maybe you could squeeze out 2 wins there, and then close with Raiders, Ravens, Browns. Yep. You're keeping me off the over, and yeah, this looks like a very tough schedule, so I'm with you, I guess. Browns, the villains of the NFL, went into 2022 with a win expectation of 10, went 8-9, 7-10 ATS, lost $100 unit better, over $1,000. So definitely one of the worst performances that we've seen thus far doing these previews. We see they hung around from a power rankings perspective all the way up until about week 13, 14, and then sold off into the end of the year.
Where they got up to 8. They were kind of everyone's darling at the beginning of the season. The week 1 game against the Chiefs stayed in people's minds. So really hanging with the Chiefs, giving them a hard time. It's like, okay, the Browns are here to stay. People were really high on Kevin Stefanski, one coach of the year in 2020. Baker Mayfield, everyone seems to have forgotten that he had his breakout 2020. He was getting ready to dominate in 2021 and was really good through the first couple of weeks. If you look at the EPA numbers there, weeks 1 and 2 was excellent. Week 3, and it all went downhill. I think some of the same reasons why people were bullish on the Browns in 2021, you should apply the same reasoning in 2022. It's a terrific head coach, a terrific offensive design. I think that Amari Cooper is a massive upgrade at wide receiver that they haven't had. And defense was very young and is only going to get better. And especially as secondary players age, they tend to get better. There's still a lot of them on their rookie deals, and these were high picks. And the edge group is one of the best in the league. Like, yes, the quarterback is the big question mark. I think Baker Mayfield was thought to be a top 10 quarterback in 2021. And he didn't actually perform that way, but all the other reasons to buy the Browns, I think, still exist. From 2 to 53 in the head coach, with the exception of the tails risk of the organizational dysfunction. Assuming that doesn't happen, there are good reasons to buy them.
And also, we know their offensive line was really destroyed throughout the course of the season.
Right.
And we look at the total scoring margin over expected, -51.5, and all of it attributable to their offense. And so a lot of upside to potentially be gained here. Very hot start, played very competitively versus the Chiefs. Were winning that game by 12, ended up losing it. But yeah, that was a sufficient spark to kind of capture all the bullish Browns bettors' imagination for what could be.
Yeah.
Browns ended up blowing it after having a 2-touchdown lead. Had an ugly game versus Denver. Ended up getting swept by the Steelers over the course of the season. 2022. Plus 380 to win the division, plus 175 to win the playoffs, plus 5,000 to win the Super Bowl. I feel like if you wanted to take a flyer on the Super Bowl, like saying that, in fact, the exact opposite of what I say happens, and like it all comes together.
That's my favorite bet. I really am hitting like on opposite, like full on tails, like 1% outcomes. I don't hate the fewest wins, and I don't hate a Super Bowl.
Because what makes it easy here is, again, you're a franchise in flux, but you ostensibly have the 8th easiest schedule. You have a positive net 2 days of rest. Again, we don't really have a lot of kind of future forecasted spreads out in the market right now. But yeah, front half of the season is certainly easier than the back half of the season.
Yeah.
And there's always the huge asterisk of trying to forecast the season here in late August. But in any case, that second half does look very tough. But if you go in at 5-3 into the bye, then you just need to squeak out 3 wins to push on that 8. It's not terrible. Moving on to the AFC champions, Cincinnati Bengals. Came into 2021. I was actually surprised by looking at this. So they came into 2021 with an expected win total of 7. That was actually pretty high. I ended up going 10-7, so well over the 7. 10-7 also has $100 unit better on the money line spread, over $500. Pythag had him at 10.5. Our Pythag 2.0 actually had him at 8.5. So actually much lower. Mean power rank about 18. 7-day power rank volatility was 6 spots. That's mostly attributable to obviously the market starting the season off very low on the Bengals and then taking them 9 weeks for them to finally kind of get up 20 spots.
There's a real kind of, I think, market adjustment after the Ravens game and immediately lost to the Jets, Mike White's Jets. And it's like everything we thought. We had like a 7-week case that was building of like, okay, maybe the Bengals are actually good. They lose to Mike White and the Jets, like downward trending. Then again, get crushed by the Browns. It was like, okay, this team isn't actually that good.
Yep.
And then it took a while to be like, okay, slowly, here come the Bengals.
You know, when we're looking at these types of charts, there's a lot to learn here around not getting caught in the moment in any specific week. Like, it's so easy to look at this and just see the future, see how it all played out, and you feel very comfortable with it.
Yeah, like spelling out the y-axis here is important. Like you can see, it looks like a pretty big jump. It's going from 11 to 18 in the span of 2 weeks. And that's a massive jump. And that's from a team we say, okay, this is like an above average to really to good team to no, they're actually below average.
Yeah, did it twice.
Yeah, no, they did it twice. And granted, some things changed over the course of the season, but I think you make a really excellent point, which is the Bengals are a prime example of the importance of kind of quantifying change over the course of the season, which is like, are certain types of changes built in where you should maintain this long-term perspective. And I think these podcasts are extremely helpful for understanding your own priors and your own perspective, and then evaluating mid-season and saying, okay, is this a good reason to jump off? Should I still be buying? Is it time to jump off? The new information come in where it's like, okay, my prior was wrong. And that's the most difficult part of being a bettor, but also the most profitable.
And I think we've seen this also time and time again as we're previewing these teams and looking back on 2021, is even some of the best teams are having these dud of games. And those on a standalone basis have proved actually to been more noise than signal, and was certainly not any reason for you to kind of reorient potentially your priors on them, or otherwise kind of reshape how you want to forecast them moving forward. And so we know off-season changes, again, something very well priced in. Everybody knows it. They meaningfully upgraded their offensive line, which was one of their key weaknesses last year. And as we saw at the beginning, when we were looking at the market kind of consensus offensive line rankings, they moved up dramatically, are now a top 15 unit. And so despite that, I feel like it's very torn on the way the market is kind of positioning on the Bengals.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that want to sell the Bengals, and we can kind of see their future win totals for a team that just went to the Super Bowl at 9.5. It's pretty low.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's like a contingency that's like, oh, they upgraded like the major weakness. They can only get better.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of people that say, oh, they were never as good as they were last year, and they were just one of those teams that got hot at the right time, and they're actually much worse.
I think this is a great example of the different push and pulls from the market. No one thought they'd go to the Super Bowl. Okay, this team overachieved. They're going to come back down to earth. And this is something I don't think the market's pricing in at all, because it very rarely prices it in, is that what if Joe Burrow gets better?
Yeah.
Like, he's the number 1 overall pick. He got much better from year 1 to year 2. Players, especially young quarterbacks, get better from year 2 to year 3. That just happens. In the same way that no one priced in the possibility that, hey, maybe Joe Burrow would actually become a top 10 quarterback, and maybe we shouldn't be power ranking the Bengals at 29th to start the season. Could be saying the same thing from year 2 to year 3. What if he takes the next step? We've got elite receivers. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd might be the league's best receiving unit. The defense is fine. They fixed their offensive line. Like, yes, they overachieved, but what if this offense is the best in the league? That wouldn't be unthinkable.
I think the fantasy market is definitely telling us that the Bengals could potentially be the most explosive offense in the NFL. And that's one thing that you and I have talked a lot about as well, is trying to source signal for betting from fantasy. I think the fantasy market is sharper than the betting market. The guys in fantasy, I feel, are just more intelligent, have like way more sophisticated ways of analyzing information, are way more comfortable with data than like the broader sports betting market. And I think, leveraging that source of information to kind of cross-pollinate different views.
Yeah, I think the market's almost building in an expectation that, as a general rule, explosive offenses are less stable year over year. We should be looking at something more like success rate if we're using an analytical statistic, because that's more stable year over year. We have an outlier here. Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are going to be better deep every year statistically. It's not going to regress to the mean because it's a specific skill. Joe Burrow is a very good deep thrower, and he's very accurate, which means that he allows for good yards after the catch. And Jamar Chase, so long as he stays healthy, is going to be elite after the catch. They're always going to be better explosive than other teams. That's not something that's going to regress, and I think the market's pricing that in. Like, we should build in some regression that this team's going to be less explosive. I don't think that's true. They're going to continue to be as explosive.
One thing that's necessary to call out, I don't hear it being cited as much for why you would be bearish on the Bengals, but it's Zach Taylor.
I was about to bring that up. That's the biggest question mark to me.
Going into last year, especially, and even throughout the course of last season, it's like, how are they doing this? Because Zach Taylor is such a bad coach. And is he getting better? I don't know, but I know it's a consistent view that he was one of the worst, if not the worst coach in the NFL. Very young, one of the youngest coaches in the NFL as well, so maybe can allow for the possibility for growth in philosophy and approach, but it didn't necessarily demonstrate itself throughout the season. It was like they were winning in spite of Zach Taylor, not because of Zach Taylor.
I think it's that, like, it's a massive question mark. And that's why I'm not being like, I'm all in the Bengals Super Bowl. I think that Joe Burrow can be a top 5 quarterback with a very good offensive line and elite receivers. That's like recipe number 1 for me to jump all over a Super Bowl team. Like, possibility of elite quarterback, elite passing game. Just like Zach Taylor's total wild card. I have no faith at all. And that's tempering me back from just like being all in on the Bengals.
Yeah, that's definitely the Achilles heel here for the Bengals. Because when you look at the Bengals potentially have the 6th hardest strength of schedule in 2022. And when you're thinking about the impact of coaching decisions, it's when there's a close game and there's a meaningful call that needs to be made that's going to dictate potentially the outcome. And maybe those things didn't pop up as much last year. I mean, the thing is, I wonder if this is a consequence of the Zach Taylor effect. We're looking at like max deficits. I'm 1, 2, I'm going to call this 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games of double-digit deficits last year. So is that, again, you're not play calling the game properly, and then it's the miraculousness of Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. And
nothing stands out more than the Super Bowl on the last drive on 3rd down from the shotgun running Samaj P. Ryan. And the shotgun,
that's when it showed itself.
Exactly, in a close game when the team needed it most.
One of the things I also wanted to call out here is, and we see how it took really long time, I guess, maybe for traditional modelers or ELO modelers to really catch up to the Bengals. It looks like actually the betting market was much faster. So we see like they were a top 5, top 10 pick starting in week 5, and really from then on all the way through the end of the season. So the market was pretty quick to adjust to seeing value in the Bengals, something that I thought was pretty interesting. The close kind of, and looking at their schedule, I mean, it does look pretty tough.
But the spreads are notable there, right? They're not huge underdogs, which I think speaks to the value of how the market is seeing the Bengals.
This also has to be a record for Bengals, at least within our lifetimes, of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 prime time games. So national audiences are going to be getting a large dose of Bengals in 2022, right? The Ravens, perhaps the most controversial team in the NFL. Always an argument around the efficacy of the Ravens and Lamar Jackson and their approach and their strategy. 2021 came in with that 10 expected wins, similar to this year. Went under that. Of course, we're devastated by injuries. There was a chart that our buddy Arjun put together that really kind of demonstrated how outsized of an impact injuries had on the Ravens. It ended up going 8-9, 7-10 against the spread. Lost $100 unit better on the money line spread, over $500. Pythag had them around 8 wins. Our Pythag 2.0, again, to my dismay, had them at 9.2, so suggesting that they're actually better than they actually were in the realized win total perspective. Because again, this is a team that I feel like no matter how injured they were, the market is relatively high on the Ravens, and for that reason, always kind of going to give them the benefit of the doubt, even if they don't necessarily perform well. But again, we're 5-1 going into week 7. Got blasted by the Bengals. Then came back, played the Vikings, didn't cover the 7, but ended up winning the game. Then looked really bad on Thursday Night Football versus the Dolphins. And that's when I feel like the cracks really started to show. And again, some of the injuries started to really catch up to them and ended up not making the playoffs, not covering their win total, again, despite a pretty promising start.
This is my bold call for the Ravens 2022. I don't think the offense is going to look anything like it did in 2021 because of the running back injuries. I think that the Ravens adopted a different style of play. Lamar Jackson both threw the ball out quicker and had a much higher passing depth, which is counterintuitive because you'd think generally the longer the play develops, the further you throw the ball. I think it actually speaks to the game plan, which was very quick throws and deep shots, because they did not really believe in their run game to kind of get the smaller yardage plays that they were doing, that they were enjoying previously. Which is almost to say that like they have their running backs healthy. The offense is not going to look like it did in 2021. I think it's going to look more like the 2019 version. More running, certainly a different passing style. I think the trade of Marquise Brown signals that, which is that they don't really care about who they're really throwing to. Back to those 2 tight end sets, and defensively, that's where most of the injuries were coming from. They lost the entirety of their secondary. It was Jamie Smith, Marcus Peters, Marlon Humphrey missed a bunch of time. Everyone was out. The defense is going to look nothing like it did in 2021.
Very little chance that the Ravens look anything like 2019. 2019, in my view, was one of those years that caught the league by surprise, and the league could just simply never catch up to it. Just could never adjust from a week-to-week basis of dealing with already whatever that team is dealing with, and then having 6 days to prepare or whatever for this offense. Just never happened.
Yeah.
But the Ravens, I've not really ever shown glimmers of that team.
To add some data using our new drive score metrics, they were by far the best team in the database, by far. Adjusted win differential of almost 12.3 points. The next is 11.7. And it's the Broncos in 2013 in Peyton Manning's prime year. That's not happening again. I think that's exactly your point. That's not happening. And I think that if bettors are trying to chase the 2019 Ravens, that's going to fail. That model cannot be replicated, and it couldn't have even been replicated in 2020 or 2021, even if everything worked out perfectly. That's just a 1 percentile outcome that happened in 2019.
I think what's also Again, we can lament that they were very injured and ended up losing a bunch of these games, and maybe they're a better team than that. But they were they were banged up right off the bat. So we know that. But this Colts game was not a justified win. And then they needed a 65 all-time greatest kick, longest kick ever from
after a 4th and 20 pass interference.
Yeah. And also when even on that 65-yard kick, there was a blatant false start.
No business putting that Sunday night game.
Oh, and that's another. I totally forgot about this one. In fact, look at that mean margin too, almost a touchdown, and ended up winning it.
Yeah.
So that's 3 games right there. So that's not a wash, but that mitigates some of this asterisk here of they lost those last 6, but they were super banged up. Ended up winning 3 games in the front half of the season that they probably shouldn't have.
Yeah. Also week 9, looking at the mean margin, they beat the Vikings.
Jeez,
they were down
I don't really remember this one, but that's hideous too.
Yeah.
Almost a touchdown again, mean margin. Win probability, 43%. End up being the Vikings.
I don't think they were that good, but I'll stand by. There's nothing to learn. The offense is going to look nothing like it. The defense is going to look nothing like this team.
One thing, though, not upgrade wide receiver in any shape, or form. They're relying totally on Rashad Bateman to materialize into what they want him to be.
Yeah. I think the only signal to glean there, if you could find a bet which allows you to bet on which team is going to run the most 12 personnel, I'd take the Ravens here. Which is that the Ravens are going to run a ton of 2 tight end formations. They're going to use their backs. They're going to use their tight ends. It doesn't really matter who their wide receivers are. And that's their bet. Whether it's going to work is a totally separate question.
So we're looking at 2022 for the Ravens. Again, win total expectations at 10, to win the division plus 140, to make the playoffs minus 165. I would never touch that. Plus 2,000 to win the Super Bowl. I think that potentially has some value. I think it was higher in the offseason and has been bid down already. Our Pythag 2.0 model, no bet here. Strength of schedule, 11th easiest. Net rest, minus 3 days. And mean spread, less than a field goal, minus 2. You start off probably as best as you could ask for. Jets, Dolphins, Patriots. Then have a tough back-to-back games, but both at home, Bills and Bengals. And then you have Giants, Browns, Bucks, and Saints into the bye.
Depending what happens in that Patriots game, we're like, oh, this team's 2-3 with 2 bad wins, two wins over non-quality team. This team's done. I can see that narrative playing out. I can also see them going 4-1 and just steamrolling over everyone.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then they're definitely going over, because you look at the back half of the season and it's much more favorable. So you have Panthers, Jags, Broncos, Steelers twice, Falcons, Browns, and then close at the Bengals.
I have a thesis on what the market's getting at right now that I think's come through in our conversation, which is that the central question around the 2022 Ravens is how much of 2019 can they capture? Are they going to be 70%? Are they going to be 80%? Are they going to be 90%? The market's a little uncertain. They're pricing in kind of a mean outcome, which is where we get 10 from.
Yeah, see, I think anything close to 2019 is off the table. 50% best case. The team is always going to be in a position to show flashes, which I think is always going to create just enough amount of noise and just to keep the argument aflame. There's always going to be enough for that. I think they could do that in week 1 versus the Jets.
Also, they have a tendency to blow out opponents. When they win big, they don't take their foot off the gas pedal.
Which ends up kind of distorting narratives.
I see this as a team that I'm going to be betting futures on, because there's going to be a lot of week-to-week volatility, a lot of just games where they show up, they don't show up, and I want a thesis that's going to play out over 17 games.
I want to have as little opinion on the Ravens on a week-to-week basis. It's always my long-term view on them is typically right.
Yeah.
But in between, I can never time it properly. So given that's the case, I just stay away.
So I love futures.
That's why you have to keep me off the temptation of trying to like bet them on a week-to-week basis. Remember what you said in the preseason? So that wraps up our preview of the AFC North. We'll see you next week when we preview the NFC North. And then we're gonna have to get into week 1 preview soon.
Oh man,
Preseason's already behind us. That's coming soon. Thanks everyone. That's closing bell.